he saw a clown holding a sign written in English. The sign read, "Great attraction, the Long Noses, acrobatic Japanese troupe, the Honorable William Batukar, proprietor. Last presentations, prior to their departure for the United States."
The United States?
Thought Passepartout.
That's where I want to go.
He followed the clown. At a large arena, he met William Batukar. After a short interview, Batukar decided to use him as a clown. Passepartout's first performance with the Long Noses was at 3 p.m. The arena was quickly filled with people from Europe, China, and Japan. During the performance, the Long Noses formed a human pyramid that reached all the way to the ceiling. As the pyramid reached the ceiling, Passepartout saw two familiar faces in the audience. There were Phileas Fogg and Auda.
Master! Master!
Passepartout cried. He crawled out from under the base of the pyramid. The human pyramid collapsed. Long-nosed clowns fell everywhere. "Passepartout, is that you?" asked Fogg.
It is me, monsieur.
"Very well, then. Let's go to the steamer." Mr. Batukar was furious. He demanded payment for the breakage of his human pyramid. Fogg handed him some money. Then they boarded the American steamboat, the General Grant. Passepartout was still wearing wings and a long nose. Passepartout told his master what had happened in Shanghai, but he didn't mention that Mr. Fix had tricked him. He felt that the time was not right for that revelation. Auda soon found her feelings toward Fogg deepening. Passepartout also made the happy discovery. Mr. Fix was still in pursuit of Phileas Fogg. He remained concealed to avoid Passepartout's anger. But Passepartout and Fix met on the deck. When Passepartout saw Fix, he grabbed him by the throat and punched him in the face. Fix brushed himself off and said, "I still think he's the bank robber, but I want him back in England, where his crime can be proven in a court of law." 11 days later, the General Grant entered San Francisco Bay. Phileas Fogg had neither gained nor lost a single day. Chapter 5. Across America. Phileas Fogg and the others arrived in America at 7 a.m. Before they got on the train, Passepartout asked if they should buy some guns. He felt they might need protection while crossing America. The American railway traveled between the east and west coasts. The train track that stretched between Omaha and San Francisco included dangers such as wild beasts, wearing Native Americans, and angry Mormons. The train left Oakland at 6 p.m. Passepartout found himself seated next to Mr. Fix, but he refused to speak to the detective. After breakfast the next morning, Fogg and his companions watched herds of buffaloes crossing the valley like brown waves. Thousands of the huge beasts passed back and forth over the train track. The train waited for 3 hours until the creatures left. 3 days later, as the train passed through the Wyoming territory, they suddenly heard savage cries. The train was under attack by wild Sioux natives. 100 of them with guns had jumped on the moving train and attacked the passengers. The passengers carried pistols and shot at the Indians. In the front of the train, in the engine room, the engineer and the coal stoker were dead from Sioux rifles. The Sioux chief wanted to stop the train, but couldn't control it. He opened the steam valve and sent the train speeding forward as fast as it could go. At the same time, Sioux warriors attacked every car, jumping from roof to roof. Fogg and the conductor found themselves fighting next to each other. When the conductor was shot and fell down, he said, "Unless this train is stopped in 5 minutes, we're going to crash and die." Passepartout heard this and slipped through a door. He crawled along under the car. Holding on to the chains, he detached the engine from the train cars. The cars were left behind while the engine sped forward. The train cars continued to roll for a few minutes and then stopped. They were 100 feet from Kearney Station. When the Sioux fighters saw the soldiers coming up, they left immediately. The passengers were counted. None were dead, but 3 were missing, including Passepartout. Many of the passengers were badly wounded. Quietly, Fogg said, "Living or dead, I'll find him." The captain of the soldiers said,
"Sir, you shall not go alone. You can take 30 of my men."
Auda waited nervously. At 7 a.m. the next morning, even the captain was worried. He considered whether he should send another group to rescue the first. Then they heard gunshots. A mile in the distance, they could see Mr. Fogg marching with the group of soldiers, as well as Passepartout and the other 2 passengers. The soldiers welcomed them back with joyful cries.
The train! Where is the train?
Cried Passepartout. "It's gone," replied Fix. Phileas Fogg was running 20 hours behind. They were stuck in Fort Kearney, 200 miles from Omaha, and the train to New York. Then Mr. Fix proposed a solution. "A gentleman I met last night has offered to take us to Omaha on a sled with sails." Fogg and his companions went to a man named Mudge. Fogg looked at a large metal sled on 2 skis that had 2 sails. There was enough room for 5 or 6 passengers to sit. By 8 a.m., the sled was ready, and the passengers sat down. The 2 great sails were hoisted, and the sled caught the wind. It began to slide over the hardened snow at 40 miles per hour. Luckily, the wind stayed strong. By noon, they crossed the Platte River, and less than an hour later, they stood at the train station in Omaha, Nebraska. Fogg rewarded Mudge and shook his hand. Within minutes, they were on a train bound for New York. They arrived in New York by 11:15 p.m. on the 11th. But the steamer, the China, had left for Liverpool just 45 minutes before they had arrived. Chapter 6. On the Way Home. The next morning, Fogg went down to the docks to find a ship to hire privately. He saw a mid-sized ship that was puffing steam, a sign that it was ready to leave. Fogg boarded the Henrietta and met the captain, a tough-looking man named Andrew Speedy. Speedy was not going to Liverpool, but rather Bordeaux, France. So Fogg paid the captain £2,000 for each passenger to travel with him to Liverpool. By noon the next day, Captain Speedy was no longer in control of the ship anymore. He was locked in his cabin like a prisoner. Speedy tried to cheat them and go to Bordeaux, his original destination. For the next few days, Fogg piloted the ship through rough weather. The ship's engineer came to speak with Mr. Fogg. Passepartout listened to their conversation. He was terrified to hear that the ship had burned up all of its coal and did not have enough to reach Liverpool. Phileas Fogg told Passepartout to let Captain Speedy out of his cabin. "I want you to sell me your ship," Fogg said to the captain seriously. "I'm going to burn her for fuel." Fogg pulled a roll of American dollars out of his pocket. "Here's $60,000. "Okay." Captain Speedy accepted the offer quietly. As soon as Fogg had bought the Henrietta, he ordered the sailors to strip every bit of wood from the cabin and the deck to burn for fuel. By the 20th, the Henrietta was now only a flat platform of iron. Fogg had only 24 hours to reach London. By docking at Queenstown, they could take a train to Dublin and then a fast boat to Liverpool, thereby gaining a few hours. 20 minutes before noon on December 21st, Fogg and his companions went ashore at Liverpool dock. They were only 6 hours away from London. Suddenly, Fogg felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mr. Fix. "Phileas Fogg, I arrest you in the Queen's name," said Mr. Fix. Phileas Fogg was put in prison. He sat in the cell with his eyes on his watch, silently hoping for a chance to get to London. In his journal, he wrote the words, "December 21st, Saturday, Liverpool, 80th day, 11:40 a.m." Then he waited. Then, at 33 minutes past 2, Fogg heard the door of his cell open. Mr. Fix entered. He was out of breath. "Sir," he huffed, "terribly sorry. A most unfortunate resemblance. The robber was arrested 3 days ago. You are free." Phileas Fogg was a free man. He looked Mr. Fix in the eyes. Then he knocked Mr. Fix down with a single punch.
Well done, monsieur,
cheered Passepartout. Fogg, Passepartout, and Aouda took a cab to the train station. The express train to London had left 35 minutes prior, so Fogg ordered a special train to leave at 3. It was 10 minutes to 9 when they stepped off the train in London. Fogg was behind by 5 minutes. He had lost the wager. From the station, Fogg ordered Passepartout to go to the market for some food. Then he and Aouda went home. Later that evening, Fogg had a private conversation with Aouda. He began by saying, "When I brought you here, I had a fortune, but now I am ruined."
"I pity you,"
continued Aouda.
"but 2 lost souls may find comfort together. Will you take me for your wife?"
Suddenly, Phileas Fogg's lips began to tremble. He closed his eyes for an instant to think. When he reopened them, he said, "Yes, by all that is holy, I love you." She cried and pressed his hand to her heart. Phileas Fogg called Passepartout immediately. When he entered the room, he saw Aouda holding Fogg's hand and understood everything instantly. Fogg asked him to go and find Reverend Samuel Wilson at the local church. He wanted to know if it was not too late to schedule a wedding ceremony for the next day. It was 5 minutes to 8.
For tomorrow, Monday?
Asked Passepartout. "Yes, for tomorrow, Monday," answered Phileas Fogg. Passepartout hurried off as fast as he could. At 35 minutes past 8, Passepartout staggered back to Fogg's house, out of breath, and said,
Master, marriage tomorrow is impossible.
"But why so?" asked Phileas Fogg.
Because tomorrow is not Monday. Tomorrow is Sunday, and the Reverend has to perform his duties at church. There are only 10 minutes left."
Then Passepartout grabbed his master by the collar and threw him out the front door. Phileas Fogg jumped into a cab and calmly said, "Take me to the Reform Club." Inside the Reform Club, Fogg's friends nervously began a round of whist. The clock ticked 18 minutes to 9. There was perfect silence in the room. 1 more minute, and they would be the winners. At the 57th second, the door opened. As the clock ticked on its 60th second, Phileas Fogg stepped in and said, "Gentlemen, here I am." It was Phileas Fogg, in person, and on the correct day. Phileas Fogg won the wager. He had gained a day because the world moves westward, yet he had traveled eastward. The next day, when Fogg saw Passepartout, the butler said to him,
I think we might have gotten around the world in 78 days if we hadn't crossed India.
"Then we would not have saved Aouda," replied Fogg. Passepartout was shocked to see his master smiling. "And I would not have gained a wife."